The Path to Freedom, the Underground Railroad, and McDonough County, Illinois, Part 2. Now, abolitionism and the Underground Railroad in McDonough County. There are three main sources that I've used to create this PowerPoint presentation. D.N. Blazer, The History of the Underground Railroad of McDonough County. This was published in 1822. And Blazer is a descendant of the Blazer family who were instrumental in the Underground Railroad in McDonough County. Then there is the book by Clark. This is the history of McDonough County, Illinois. This is published in 1878, so it's an overall history of the county up to that point. It does deal with abolitionism and the Underground Railroad. And then the best book, the most thorough account, is Owen Mueller's The Underground Railroad in Western Illinois that came out in 2008. Now, a good example of the hostility to abolitionism in the county is an episode in which pro-slavery and anti-abolitionist group of men tried to prevent an evening program that focused on abolitionism that was scheduled at the old Camp Creek Church. Abolitionist members of the church brought a prominent abolitionist to McDonough County to deliver a talk that evening on the evils of slavery. The antagonists to the anti-slavery program served notice that they would not allow this person to speak. They came to the church armed and were prepared to prevent the talk. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the plea to let the man speak was accepted, but really only briefly. The speaker gave some opening remarks about the inhumane condition of African Americans enslaved in the South. However, afterward, the abolitionists held a meeting, and after his opening remarks, decided that in the interest of public safety, the scheduled evening program would be canceled. In 1852, the county's abolitionists had a presidential candidate that they intended to vote for. It was John P. Hale of the Free Soil Party. Pro-slavery advocates were determined to prevent any man from casting an abolitionist vote in the county. Residents had a variety of places to vote at that time. However, there was no secret ballot. It was a voice vote in which the voter told the clerk who he intended to vote for. The voting place in Macomb that year was James M. Campbell's store on the west side of the square north of West Jackson Street, also known as Campbell's Corner. The abolitionists decided to vote together for their personal security. So 9 men voted for Hale, although Blazer could only find hard evidence that 6 men actually voted for Hale, and these are the men who did so, both at the Allison and Blazer families. The day of the vote, the abolitionists and the pro-slavery advocates were both armed. Every man had a pistol or a rifle. The men voting carried guns on their shoulders as they marched single file to the polling place, and fortunately, no violence took place. Now, there are not very many documented cases of escaped slaves moving through McDonough County. Clark, when researching the history, found it very difficult to find county residents willing to discuss the Underground Railroad in McDonough County. In fact, in his book, his informants are really just Mr. T and Mr. D. A few wanted to use their actual names in print, and the Blazer family history to tap into, but not much beyond that. One of the fullest accounts of an escaped slave coming through McDonough County was a man named Charlie. He was a Missouri slave owned by Mr. Bush. Charlie was in charge of a slave crew when the owner was away. On one such day, he supervised a slave crew that was taking a load of wheat to market in town. That evening, Charlie decided to make his escape. He pretended he was going to a dance that evening at Hannibal, but he had taken food with him. From Hannibal, he made a break for the Mississippi River. He did not tell his wife or children that he was making the escape. Charlie had about 48 hours head start from Bush before he could sick his dogs on the trail of Charlie. By that time, Charlie was across the river in an old skiff and was safely housed in the Van Dorens and John Brown and Quincy. The Blazers housed and fed Charlie and assisted him through McDonough County to the next station shop. Once he arrived in Canada, he found support among Pennsylvania Presbyterians who agreed to journey to Missouri and purchase wife and children. One of the Presbyterians, a minister, went to Missouri to secure an agreement that for $800, Bush would free Charlie's wife and children. Put this up while I'm talking about this here. And so he was, for $800, the owner was going to allow Charlie's wife and children to be free. However, when the minister arrived in Missouri, Bush had risen the price to $1,200. The minister returned and was able to secure additional funds and again went back to Missouri. found that Bush raised the price again to $1,500. So when Charlie learned of this new amount, he resolved not to buy his family, but to journey back to Missouri and free them. Charlie retraced the Quincy line back through Fulton County, where he stayed with the Dobbins, and then went to the Blazers in McDonough County. However, he got lost due to dense fog and was able to find a place to sleep. When he awoke, though, he found two men standing over him, ready to capture Charlie and plus get a reward. Charlie, though, was armed with a knife and struck out at these men, slashing one and overpowering the other. Charlie safely made his way to the Blazer home. There he was fed and sheltered for the evening and then headed out the next morning. Charlie made it to Missouri, but was unable to secure his wife and children with him, though he did assist some slaves escape through Illinois and McDonough County. Charlie returned a second time. However, Bush suspected Charlie may try again, so the owner kept his wife and children in a room close to that of his own. At night, amazingly, Charlie was able to secure the freedom of his wife and children and spirit them away before Bush knew what was happening. The family made their way to the river, where they found an old skiff to row to the Illinois side. They made it to an island close to the Illinois side, only to find two armed men to confront them. Charlie had a revolver, drew on the men. A standoff ensued, and Charlie tried to parley with them and also discuss things with his wife. In the end, she convinced him to save himself. He did so by diving into the river and swimming to the shore. In a few months, he returned to Missouri yet again, but discovered that his wife and children had been sold, were now living in St. Louis. Charlie made his way to St. Louis and successfully escaped with them to Illinois, through McDonough County, and eventually to Canada. It is rather remarkable that an escaped slave can make his way back and forth through Illinois and through inhospitable counties such as McDonough. This indicates to me that there may have been plenty of well-known conductors to offer support, some white people who may have supported spontaneously, and other white people who may just look the other way and did not notify law enforcement. Now, one of the last documented efforts by an escaped slave to make their way through McDonough County took place in 1860. They were all male slaves and had been brought from the Tennessee Hemp Works and were headed to Missouri. At a river stop, they were able to escape to Quincy in June. The owner announced a $500 reward apiece for each escaped slave. From the Quincy station stop, they traveled to Round Prairie. They traveled to and from Quincy and Round Prairie while they were hoping things would calm down. Eventually, they were taken to the Blazer's place by Pettyjohn and were hidden in cornfields and supplied with water and food. There were like 11 or 12 of these escaped slaves. On Pettyjohn's return to Round Prairie, he encountered Dave Chrisman, perhaps in Fandon, which is the southeast corner of McDonough County. Chrisman knew of Pettyjohn's reputation as abolitionist, and Chrisman was one of the leading slave sympathizers in the county. Chrisman and his associates started paying the Blazers a visit, knowing that they were abolitionists and conductors on the Underground Railroad. They did this at one time in order to keep an eye on the Blazer family and see if they could find any escaped slaves. John Blazer conducted a scheme to fool the pro-slavers. One of the Blazers loaded up a wagon with grain, covered it with a tarp, and proceeded to the mill and burned it up. This was basically a way to lure the pro-slavers away from the Blazer farm. 20 to 30 men on horseback chased down the wagon. Finding no escaped slaves, they headed back to the Blazer farm. By then, John Blazer was trying to get the escaped slaves to make a run to a stand of trees. They all escaped except one slave, who Chrisman struck on the back of the fellow's head with his gun. All the others successfully made their way to the next station stop. The one unfortunate slave was taken to the Macomb jail and remained there until his owner arrived. Chrisman expected a reward, but was disappointed. The owner claimed that he had lost too much money through lost labor to pay up. Later that evening, Chrisman and 10 more of his crew went to the Blazer house, pelted it with stones and rocks. John Blazer was not at home, but Mrs. Blazer stood on her porch with an axe in her hand, ready to protect her children in her home, and Chrisman and his crew decided to end their siege. Now, concluding this lecture, generally speaking, the Underground Railroad was owner-organized, was not really well organized. Was organized, but it was decentralized as a movement. Many of the abolitionists were connected to religious denominations, such as the Presbyterian Church, the Congregationalist Church, the Quaker Church. Therefore, the religious connection was an important factor in organizing the Underground Railroad through Illinois. This was also true of the Underground Railroads that existed in other northern states. However, the case of Blazer and Allison families, religion may not have been an overriding motivation for being conductors on the Underground Railroad. For them, slavery was a moral wrong, and assisting escaped slaves was a moral duty. An article by Verna Cooley came out in 1917. She noted that the Van Dorns had claimed that over a 25-year period, as the conductor, Mr. Van Dorn, had assisted between 200 and 300 slaves. Many of them would have gone through McDonough County. We just don't really have any reliable numbers that could be provided by the Blazer Allison families, but there definitely were dozens, if not several hundred, making their way through McDonough County. And then here is an image of the Allison family home. There's Harmon Allison II, and his wife Nanny. This is a picture of Andrew Allison. Herman Allison. And then the tombstone shown here for William Allison, his wife Sarah, their son Harmon, and his wife Beulah. The stones are located just north of intersections of East and West and North and South Drives in the old part of Oakwood Cemetery here in Macomb. And a couple hundred feet to the south is a more modern tombstone for Andrew and his wife Lucinda.